found him. Naked, but for his socks, propped against fallen soldiers as if he were only sleeping. But it wasn't sleep. His chest and head were pierced with bullets. His brother Tom lay gutted beside him, scalp torn away. We told the world Custer died bravely, untouched by the horrors around him. But that was a lie. We lied to his widow. We lied to the public. And now you're about to know why. Bodies were desecrated on this battlefield, men mutilated beyond recognition. This is the untold story of what happened after Custer's last stand. For the victorious Lakota and Cheyenne, the first step was looting their fallen enemies. The American soldiers had valuable belongings, and now they belonged to the victors, just as the soldiers would have done if the tables were turned. Weapons, jewelry, uniforms, badges, and even abandoned horses were taken. Lakota warrior Brave Bear remembered. There was lots of fussing and quarreling over the horses and guns that were captured. Indians were saying to each other, "I got some tobacco, I got coffee, I got a good gun." To the warriors, the spoils of battle were a rightful reward. But this process was brutal for the dead. Nearly everybody was stripped of clothing and left exposed under the blazing sun. In some cases, feet were cut off to steal boots more easily. The Lakota and Cheyenne customarily took scalps from fallen foes, and this battlefield was no exception. For hours, warriors claimed scalps from the dead as trophies of war. Women, too, joined in the desecration. Cheyenne women later said they had driven awls into Custer's ears. Years afterward, it was revealed that someone forced an arrow into a degrading place on Custer's body, a detail the Army hid to protect his widow. According to Lakota warrior Iron Hawk, some of Custer's men pretended to be dead, but were caught by women combing through the battlefield. He recalled seeing two elderly women strip a man and begin cutting him apart, only for the soldier to leap up and fight them off. They quickly killed him, but Iron Hawk admitted he found the sight of a naked man battling two old women strangely comical. Not everyone laughed. Allegedly, Sitting Bull himself was troubled. His visions had promised victory, but warned of a curse if the dead were disturbed. Whether he truly opposed the mutilations is uncertain. Since accounts of his words came years later, he may have been distancing himself from acts condemned by outsiders. Meanwhile, the fight was not yet over. Much of the 7th Cavalry still survived under Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen, fortified on what became known as Reno Hill. Sitting Bull's warriors harassed them through the night of June 25th and throughout June 26th, finally breaking off on the morning of June 27th when scouts reported U.S. reinforcements approaching. Reno and Benteen had been too engaged in their desperate defense to know what had happened to Custer. It was General Alfred Terry and Colonel John Gibbon's forces who uncovered the scale of the catastrophe. Scouts first stumbled upon bloodied uniforms of U.S. officers, abandoned and empty camps loot, left behind when Sitting Bull's warriors withdrew. Soon after, another scout delivered worse news. "I have counted 197 dead bodies lying in the hills." When asked if they were white men, he replied, "Yes, white men." Terry and Gibbon immediately realized disaster had struck. They feared the entire 7th Cavalry had been destroyed, but their scouts soon located Reno and Benteen's survivors. Terry and Gibbon hurried to meet them, finding them battered but alive. Both officers had assumed Custer had left them to chase glory. Instead, they learned of his fate. Benteen and part of his men were sent to locate Custer. The scene they discovered was horrific. The corpses of comrades lay rotting after 2 days in the Montana heat. They first came upon the bodies of Company L, led by Custer's brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Calhoun, still arranged in the defensive line where they had fallen at Calhoun Hill. Elsewhere, the dead were scattered, either killed in panic or moved after death. Another cluster of bodies lay on the slope that became known as Last Stand Hill. Private Jacob Adams was the first to spot the fallen commander. He called Captain Benteen, who confirmed, "By God, that's him." Custer's body was found near the top of the hill, just 20 feet from his brother Tom. Like the rest, he was stripped naked save for his socks. Unlike Tom, he had not been scalped. His body was propped as if seated against fellow soldiers, his expression strangely peaceful, almost like sleep. Lieutenant James Bradley later wrote that about 200 more bodies from Custer's command were scattered between the hills and the river by Sitting Bull's abandoned camp. In a letter, he reassured the public that the fallen had not been badly treated, that mutilations were minimal. But this was false. Private Charles Windolph later admitted Bradley's words were intended to spare grieving families. In truth, the mutilations were shocking. Some bodies were mutilated beyond description. Isaiah Dorman, the Black Scout, had been so badly defiled that a kettle of his blood was left beside him as an insult. Most soldiers had been scalped, riddled with arrows, or struck with axes and war clubs after death. Custer's body officially showed only 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the head, either of which could have been fatal, along with a knife wound in his thigh. But the more degrading details, such as the arrow violation, were deliberately concealed from the record to protect Libby Custer. Tom Kuster fared worse, scalped, skull-crushed, and disemboweled. He could only be identified by a tattoo on his arm. 2 days in the summer heat had left the bodies already decomposing, the smell unbearable. Colonel Gibbon admitted the scene was overwhelming, and survivors never forgot it. Some later insisted that everyone on Last Stand Hill had been dead when reinforcements arrived. But Private Adams recalled something different. Among the corpses, he and others heard a faint noise. It came from a survivor, a horse. It was Comanche, a bay gelding belonging to Captain Miles Keogh, lying wounded but alive beside his dead rider. Struck by multiple bullets and arrows, parched and exhausted, the horse had endured days without care, yet had remained near Keogh's body. Soldiers quickly tended to him. Though other horses survived the battle, Comanche's ordeal and solitary presence on Last Stand Hill made him a symbol. He recovered, became the 7th Cavalry's mascot, and lived until 1891, honored with a full military funeral. On June 27th, soldiers counted and tried to identify the dead. Many could not be named with certainty. 19 bodies were never recovered. Over the years, remains continued to be found in the hills, suggesting some soldiers fled the hill only to be hunted down later. The following morning, June 28th, the burials began. Benteen counted 208 dead. Bradley counted 206. In any case, time was short and danger lingered. Fearing renewed attack, the soldiers dug shallow mass graves or buried men where they fell. Custer and Tom were laid side by side in a makeshift grave at the base of the hill, wrapped in canvas, with stones placed to deter scavengers. Who dug the grave remains debated, with several men later claiming the honor. By evening, the burials were complete. General Terry was eager to withdraw. 50 wounded needed urgent care, and word of the disaster had to reach command. The column marched toward the Bighorn River, where the steamer Far West awaited. Along the way, medics treated the injured as best they could, amputating limbs when necessary, though some still died en route. For the survivors, the psychological toll was severe. Major Reno drowned his pain in alcohol, purchasing 11 gallons of whiskey within weeks of returning. Captain Benteen also turned to drink, eventually quarreling with Captain Thomas Weir, who accused him of abandoning Custer. Benteen challenged him to a duel, which Weir declined. Racked with guilt, Weir died later that year in his New York hotel room. Meanwhile, the Far West sped up the Missouri River with 38 wounded and the devastating news. In under 3 days, it traveled 710 miles back to Fort Abraham Lincoln, setting speed records. At dawn on July 6th, Libby Custer awoke to the sound of the ship's arrival. Hours later, officers delivered the news to her and her sister-in-law, Maggie. Both women collapsed in grief. Libby, married to George for 12 years, had been his childhood sweetheart. The officers remembered the moment as unbearable, their sobs and tears without comfort. Yet Libby quickly turned to duty, accompanying them to console the 26 other widows at the fort. For the rest of her life, Libby Custer defended her husband's legacy, blaming Reno and Benteen for the disaster until her death in 1933. The public first learned of the defeat on July 7th, only 3 days after celebrating America's centennial. The shocking news dominated the press, sparking debate over blame, Custer's recklessness, Reno and Benteen's failures, or both. The nation was left stunned, mourning one of the gravest defeats ever suffered by the U.S. Army at the hands of native warriors. The tragedy is not only that hundreds of men died that day, but that their deaths were quickly recast into legend, their suffering softened to spare families and to preserve reputations. What does it say about a nation when the truth of its greatest battlefield defeat must be buried under carefully crafted lies? Was Custer remembered as a hero or manufactured into one? That's the uncomfortable reality history leaves us with. Kindly like, share, and subscribe to my channel to watch more interesting history videos like this. Thanks for watching.